Welcome to Talk to Connect, the podcast where we explore how to have transformative engagement to create stronger personal and professional relationships. I created this podcast because connection with others has become more difficult in this time of heavy social media, differing viewpoints, and increased anxiety in the world. I'm your host, Michelle Franklin, so let's talk to connect. Okay, I'm going to start this episode asking a question. Okay, show of hands, how many of you have either parents, intimate partners, or bosses that never show any vulnerability? Okay, I'm sure many hands went up, including mine. So next question. And you can be 100% honest with your response since only you know the answer, okay? So how many of you are totally 100% at ease and comfortable with expressing vulnerability? So I'm going to make an educated guess that there were probably far fewer hands going up than the first question. So why is that? I mean, what exactly is it about being vulnerable that causes so many smart, intelligent, even confident and accomplished people to avoid it like the plague? So that's what we're going to talk about today in this episode. And I wanted to talk about it because I've had some recent experiences that reminded me of the power of being vulnerable and how it actually helps create connection between people. And I also thought about the irony, right? That the very thing many of us try to actively avoid, being vulnerable, because in our mind, either a boss with an employee or a spouse or a parent to a child, many of us have the thought that showing vulnerability also means weakness, right? And that will either, lose respect or be taken advantage of. So we create these reasons to justify our avoidance of being vulnerable. But what we really fail to think about and recognize is having a genuine opportunity to be authentically vulnerable actually creates more connection, either with that employee or with your spouse or with our children. Therefore, actually creating more respect and more relatability. Now, if you find that hard to believe, let me ask you this. So think about a time when you asked, let's say your boss, a question, and you knew that they were clearly making up an answer in that moment, right? So when that happens, honestly, do you find yourself having more respect for your boss or less? So I'll take a wild guess that many people said less. Yeah. But we go along, play the game that our trust and belief in their leadership isn't compromised. But each time that occurs, we know that it is. And guess what? That's the same thing that happens in our intimate relationships with our significant other, as well as with our own kids, when parents just make up an answer, right? Instead of just saying, I don't know. Now, I'm sure some parents in the audience probably cringed at the thought of telling their child, especially a teenager, that they don't know. Because we think we're supposed to just have all the answers for our kids, or even as a boss, that we're supposed to have all the answers. Or in a relationship, if we show vulnerability by apologizing for something we did or said. So we're thinking the other person may then see that as weak, right? And will either take advantage of us or try to get over on us. And that can be, pretty scary to think that someone is going to be taking advantage of you just being open and being honest. But isn't it true that we actually respect people more who are honest, who can actually admit mistakes or even apologize and essentially show that they're human? So the very characteristic that actually helps create respect and trust and connection often is the very thing that many of us are afraid to show. So it really made me start thinking about this time that we're in right now, where, it just seems like it's becoming more and more the norm to just disconnect. Disconnect from truth, disconnect from reality, and disconnect from each other. And that we actually have to make a conscious effort every day to exercise our humanity muscle of being open and being honest and just being vulnerable to be able to connect with others. So I had this wild thought the other day, right? That what if we actually embraced a different perspective of strength? Meaning, many of us who have found ourselves just making up answers or not apologizing likely have a definition of strength that involves never doing either of those, right? But what if we embrace that doing the thing we fear most is actually strength? It does take confidence in oneself and courage, and yes, strength to face potential embarrassment of admitting when you're wrong. But I've found that each time, especially as a supervisor, that I made the choice to tell my ego, okay, Michelle, get over yourself, you were wrong. Or, Michelle, don't act like you know that answer and just say you don't know, but you'll find out and get back to them. That each time I made that choice, I inherently felt the connection, trust, and respect increase. But I have to admit, the first few seconds, just before I respond, I'm having this kind of, I don't know, like a free falling kind of feeling that my 5-year old self has a reaction of not wanting to be embarrassed. So it does require the adult you telling the younger you who still remembers and carries those moments and memories of being embarrassed that you are an adult now. And even if you experience embarrassment, you can handle it now. So, this would require training ourselves to have a different type of reaction and even relationship to being vulnerable and our responses in that moment that probably we're not actually used to. And then the more I thought on this, it led me to another idea to try on. Now, just bear with me, okay? So, what if we use this term we hear a lot these days, right? The new normal. So, what if we defined it differently? Meaning, often we hear the new norm, right? So, that's referring to getting used to something that wouldn't have made any sense before or wasn't okay or proper etiquette to do before, and that we should just now accept it. But what if there's a movement to flip that? And the new normal is maybe being vulnerable, or the new normal is being unique, or being different, or being original. Because if being unique, different, and original was more widely accepted and not ridiculed, then it would be much easier to embrace diversity, to embrace inclusion. And in that space of being able to embrace inclusion and diversity, it actually allows space for our vulnerable self to exist with confidence instead of with fear. Because isn't that really one of the scary elements as to why we avoid being vulnerable? Because we don't want to open ourselves up to being perceived as different. So let's embrace different. So I believe that's really just each of our own unique lights that should shine and light up each of our individual paths that we're on. So, quick story. So, I've been talking to my son about self worth, his own uniqueness, his light. And actually, I started having these conversations when he was around 7 or 8. Okay. Son of a therapist, I know. So, when we think about kids at that age, we always kind of think that they don't understand these types of concepts, but you would really be surprised. They do. So you should try it on for those of you who have young ones. So I gave him one example recently, and he's 16 now, and I saw it in his eyes that he actually got it. Such a joy for parents, right? And so what I shared with him was about a time some years back that I was renting a house and the owner decided to sell it. So I was looking for another house to rent, and I was literally having sleepless nights on being able to find a nice home to rent in a good neighborhood that I could afford as a single mom, because at that time the rental market was skyrocketing and super competitive. Well, still is, right? I mean, like every open house for rentals would have like 50 people walking through in a 2-hour block. So I saw this one house online and I just fell in love with it. Great neighborhood, nice backyard to put up a basketball hoop, just a perfect price, everything. And I thought, I like this house. I want this house. So much so that I plan to bring my laptop to the open house because if I liked it as much in person as I did seeing it online, I was going to sit in my car after I left the open house to immediately do the online application. But I had one worry, one huge worry, actually. So, all the open houses that I had been attending up until that point, probably about 20 or so, 98% of the people coming through were couples. And here I am, single mom. So I'm thinking, well, an owner probably prefers two income renters than a single income renter because if one of them loses their job, there is still income coming in to make rent, right? So that was causing me just a lot of anxiety that I just had to quiet and tell myself, that's my house, well, rental house, and I'm going to stand out, be different, and show my light. So I go to the open house and I see the rep for the open house standing in the kitchen with the sign and sheet for contact information on a clipboard on the counter next to her. And couples are just coming in, walking by her, signing the sheet, not saying anything, and then carrying on like she wasn't even there. It was actually kind of weird. So they didn't know who she was. Okay. I didn't know who she was. Like she could be the owner, temporary staff, secretary, neighbor. Like, I don't know. Who knows? But what I realized was whoever she is, somebody trusts her to be here with the clipboard. And I'm going to make an impression. So I went up to her, introduced myself, shook her hand, asked some random question about the house. I don't even remember what. I just wanted to get into a conversation with her because I'm a pretty good conversationalist. So I told her I really liked the house and that I brought my laptop to do the application and that I was going to sit in my car and fill it out. And I did just that. So when the open house was over, she walked out the house, locked the door, came up to my car, and while I was filling out the application, and she goes, "So what's your name again?" And I told her, and she said, "Okay, it was really nice meeting you." And I thought, yep, I got it. And yes, she called me 2 days later to rent it to me. And so I was sharing that story with my son because he's starting to go out on job interviews. And I was having a conversation about make yourself memorable and that it's okay to be different because he's asking me, well, why can't I just wear nice jeans to the interview? And I'm like, okay, yes, if you want to be like every other teenager going to Panera to interview, right? So that discussion sparked my thinking about being different and the new norm and how, what if we as a society embraced being different as the new norm? Because I tell you, our kids are increasingly growing up so afraid to stand out from the rest of their friends or stand out from the pack. And I just kind of fear at times that we're raising followers, right, instead of leaders. And that is absolutely the time that we're in. We need young leaders and young leaders who have the ability to be vulnerable and show up as their authentic and true self. But that also starts with the adults in their lives modeling that. So, a few questions I want to leave you with. One, identify for yourself what keeps you from being vulnerable with others. Two, what can you actively do to change that? And three, pick at least one person in your life that you can work your vulnerable muscle with and journal what happens each time you do it. How did you feel before, during, and after? And how did they respond? Now, a couple of book recommendations that I like to make are both from Brene Brown. You all know I love me some Brene Brown. And she really has just great vulnerability models that she talks about in her books. But the two are Daring Greatly and Strong Ground. So those are really phenomenal readings. And if you really want to embrace vulnerability, Just get on your own journey, get on your own path, practice it, make a goal at least once a week. And I definitely look forward to hearing your results. Let's take it on, the new normal. Thank you for listening to Talk to Connect. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to follow or subscribe to my podcast and share it with others. A new episode will drop the 4th Tuesday of every month. And if you have a question you'd like me to answer on a future episode, email me at michelle@letstalktoconnect.com. That's Michelle, spelled Michell. So that's 2 L's, no E on the end, at letstalktoconnect.com. So let's continue talking to connect and create transformation in our personal and professional relationships.